This is Craig Stocks, and this is the last in my series of short videos talking about working with color in monochrome images from an astronomy camera. If you've been following along, you saw the first 3 videos that talked about the Photoshop interface, the structure of an image, and some of the details of working in Photoshop. The previous video, we talked about ways to add color to a monochrome image and ways to do that in a non-destructive, editable way of working that also doesn't add to the file size. In this video, we're going to talk about blending colors when you have video or images from multiple filters. In this example, we'll be working with hydrogen and oxygen. So let's move ahead. So we worked before with this image of the Rosette Nebula, and this is the hydrogen alpha, and I also captured some oxygen, and these have already been processed to some extent to give me a monochrome hydrogen alpha and a monochrome oxygen image. One of the things I like to do is remove the stars. So if I look at this next layer, and this is actually a layer group labeled hydrogen, and if I expand it, you can see that there's a couple things in here. Most notably, there is a starless layer. So when I turn this on, and this is in normal blending mode, what I have now is a starless version of the hydrogen alpha data. And I've done a couple other things here in terms of cleaning up some of the nebulosity and also some of the artifacts from the stars. And then there's a curves adjustment to brighten it up. So I prefer, at least my current thinking is I like the HOO, or hydrogen mapped to red, and oxygen mapped to green and blue. So I'm going to do that here. The simple way to do it, as we talked about before, is with curves. I can use just a simple curve and in effect turn off the green and turn off the blue, and that gives me a nice solid red. But I really prefer working with the gradient fill layer. So I have some amount of yellow and orange, which helps differentiate some of these brighter areas from the darker areas. Red is a good color for dark. Yellow or orange is a better color for light areas. And because I don't have any stars in the image, I can very freely use this curve below the adjustment layer to change the brightness without having any impact on the stars. And star removal is probably a whole another set of videos, but if you go to the top of the layer stack, you can see I have a group up here with the stars that I can turn on and put the stars back into the image if I decide I want an image with stars. So that's my hydrogen information, and if we're happy with that, I'll close this layer group. And let's look at the oxygen. So that's kind of where it ends up. The way I got there was I started with this. Let's go back to normal mode. So this was the oxygen data, just looking at the layer in normal blending mode. And because this is sitting on top of the hydrogen, we have 2 things we have to take into account. The first one is the blending mode. How do we want these pixels to interact with the pixels in the layer below? And if it's in normal blending mode, it will just cover it up and you won't see anything. And we could possibly use a mask, but masking becomes problematic when you're trying to get fine details. So it's better to let the image kind of do the work on its own. And the way to do that is by changing the blending mode from normal to lighten. And what that does then, it lets this layer brighten the area below it and blend together, but we still get the color. Now, it's adding probably too much brightness, so I'll add a curves layer. And if you followed along in the others, let me turn this layer on. If you remember, we talked about clipping masks. And this is the second thing that's important when we're stacking and blending colors, is any adjustments that we want to do to this upper layer, which in this case is the oxygen layer. We need to clip these adjustments to that layer so that it's only affecting the oxygen and not affecting the underlying hydrogen data. So I can come to this curve, I can make the oxygen curve brighter or darker, I can darken the background so that the oxygen data isn't going to lighten the background anymore and that it's only affecting this central portion. So that's adding gray into the center. If we want to add color, we can do it with a curve. And in this case, let's go to red, and we already have the red turned off. I still have some green in here. Let's bump the green down a little bit to make it a little bit more purplish. And we can also, if we want to, we could adjust the blue, and we could even add more blue or less blue to fine-tune the color that we're adding. The other alternative is, let me turn this off, and I'll turn on a gradient fill layer. And just like we did before, we have a color chosen here for those midtones. I can click on it, change the nature of the color that I want to reflect the oxygen data. I can change the tint if I want it to be more greeny or more blue. And this is all non-destructive, that I can change it, save the file, come back to it, change it again without having any impact on the underlying pixels. So it gives me a great deal of flexibility. And ultimately, you may decide that it's too much, so you can even change the opacity of an individual layer or of the whole group to blend it in. And when you find something you like, you can save the file. Don't flatten it, because all that does is bake all these changes into the pixels, and you lose the opportunity to go back and edit it later when you change your mind. And if you're like me, after you save a file and you look at it the next day, you'll see something you wanted to do different. So once you have them mixed together the way you want, decide whether or not you want stars, with or without, and you have a finished image. So that's my technique for adding color to monochrome images. I basically will use either a curves or more likely a gradient fill adjustment to add color to that monochrome layer. I will clip that layer onto the layer that it's affecting so it doesn't affect the layers below it. And you can get much more interesting results, much more editable results, and in the long term I think you'll get better results because you have the opportunity to go back and undo and redo and learn from what you've done without destroying any pixels in the process. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.